Officer Mason Briggs had seen his fair share of missing persons cases, teen runaways, cold-footed spouses, even the occasional wilderness misadventure. But this case, gnawed at him like a stone in his boot. And it wasn't just the woman's photo on the flyer that unsettled him. It was his dog. His K9 partner Duke had gone stiff the second they stepped onto the trail near the Cascade foothills. One paw forward, ears pricked, body trembling like a taut wire. Something was out there. Hannah Lewis had been missing for 8 days, 29 years old, moved from Kansas to Oregon to take a job as a live-in housekeeper at some remote property. No criminal history, no known enemies, no history of mental illness. The only red flag? A vague Craigslist listing, now deleted. Her sister had called the local PD 3 days after the last text. Mason picked up the case when it hit state jurisdiction, and right away it smelled wrong. The kind of wrong Duke could practically taste. They had hiked 3 miles off trail already. The fog hung low, creeping through the Douglas firs like a ghost unsure of its destination. Mason tightened the strap of his vest as Duke suddenly yanked the leash left, toward a brush-covered slope. "Hold on, boy," Mason muttered. But the dog wasn't stopping. He was growling now, low and steady, his nose skimming the mossy ground like a bloodhound on a fresh trail. Mason followed, boots crunching pine needles, pulse quickening. They crossed a shallow creek, ducked under fallen logs, and finally emerged into a clearing that felt wrong. Not visibly wrong, just wrong in the gut. The trees had been trimmed in a perfect circle, too neat, too unnatural. Then Duke stopped cold. He stood still as a statue, eyes fixed on something ahead. Mason followed his gaze and saw it, a partially buried metal post, rusted, bent slightly at the top. A fence, or what used to be one. Mason crouched and brushed away the dirt. Barbed wire, someone had tried to hide it. He looked around. No buildings, no trails, no lights. Just the eerie silence of a forest pretending to be untouched. "Okay," Mason whispered, rising slowly. "Let's mark this." He pulled out his GPS tracker and dropped a pin. Duke circled the area, nose to the ground, and whined once. A high-pitched, uneasy sound that Mason hadn't heard since their last search and rescue op. A teenage girl found hypothermic in an abandoned barn. This wasn't just a dead lead. This was something. Back at the sheriff's department, Mason brought up the map overlay for the region. He zoomed in, then pulled old records, survey logs, land ownership transfers, environmental zoning permits. A 25-acre tract labeled Riverbend Campground appeared in a 1983 document, sold in 1989. No recent tax records, no active development, like it had been erased. But it hadn't. It had just been forgotten. And people don't vanish in places that are remembered. Mason opened his incident folder and flipped to the printouts. Hannah Lewis was just the latest. 2 other women, one from Montana, one from Idaho, had both taken similar live-in job offers in the past 18 months. Both vanished within a week of arrival. Different states, same pattern. He rubbed his temples. Something was connecting them, and Duke knew it. The next morning, Mason returned to the trail before sunrise. Fog still draped the forest like wet wool, but this time he didn't hesitate. He let Duke lead. They passed the rusted post again, then ventured deeper. A half-mile in, Duke stopped, sniffed, then bolted toward what looked like nothing at all. But as Mason caught up, he saw it. Beneath the moss and bramble, an old utility trail. Hidden, narrow, winding toward the valley's edge. 15 minutes later, they saw it. A gate, not new but sturdy. Chain link with a padlock thick as a soda can. The hinges had been oiled recently. Mason scanned the area. No signs, no buildings, just silence. But Duke was pacing, sniffing, pawing at the gate like it held the answer to every missing woman in the Northwest. Mason's radio crackled. Static, no signal. He stepped back, took photos, logged coordinates. Then Duke froze. Through the trees, down a slope, Mason spotted something white between the pines. A tarp? A structure? He couldn't tell, but Duke was locked in, ears forward, body trembling. That's when he made the call. Hey friends, if you're as hooked as we are by stories of courage, loyalty, and the animals that uncover truths we miss, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals on YouTube. Our stories honor the unsung heroes who serve and protect, one paw print at a time. Mason didn't sleep that night. The image of the overgrown trail, the locked gate, The way Duke had whined at the clearing, it all replayed in his head. There was no cabin marked on maps, no landowner on record. But someone had oiled that gate, someone had locked it, and someone had lured Hannah Lewis there. He filed a report, but it was buried under red tape. No signs of a crime, no warrant, just a hunch and a dog's instinct. But Mason didn't care. He knew what he saw and what he felt. The next morning, he printed out photos of 3 women. Hannah Lewis, April Corbin, Marissa Dunn. All had vanished after applying for similar jobs. All were between 25 and 32. All were pregnant. That part hadn't been in the original reports, but it was there in their social media posts, family interviews, even a voicemail from Hannah's OBGYN rescheduling her 10-week ultrasound. Mason stared at the board. This wasn't a coincidence. This was targeted. 3 days later, a tip came in. A hiker reported seeing a white van with no plates exiting a dirt road near the same trail. The van turned toward Highway 26 and vanished into the morning fog. No driver description, no plate to run, but the timing lined up with Hannah's last ping. And Mason knew one thing. If they didn't act soon, someone else would disappear. So he and Duke returned to the gate. But this time, they brought bolt cutters. The lock snapped louder than Mason expected. Bolt cutters clattered to the ground, and for a beat, all he heard was Duke's breathing. Heavy, focused. The dog stared through the gate like it wasn't just steel and rust. It was a veil hiding something he couldn't quite reach. Mason nudged the chain link open and stepped onto the trail beyond. His boots sunk slightly into the mossy dirt, and Duke padded ahead, tail straight, nose twitching. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. It felt like destiny was dragging them forward, whether they were ready or not. The trail was old, overgrown but recently disturbed. Twigs snapped clean, and the edges of certain ferns were crisped, like tires had brushed them days ago. Mason took photos as they moved, logging every detail. A mile in, the forest shifted. The air turned cooler, the trees denser, darker. Even the birds stopped singing. And then he saw it. A clearing roughly the size of a football field, carved deep into the forest belly. In the center stood an old barn, weathered siding, warped tin roof, and windows that had long since surrendered to time. From a distance, it looked abandoned. But Duke didn't think so. He lowered his head, growled low, and advanced with cautious steps, muscles tight like he was moving into enemy territory. Mason followed, one hand on his holstered sidearm, the other gripping his radio. Still no signal. They circled the building. The back had a small fenced-in area, almost like a kennel, but no signs of dogs. Just scratch marks on the inside of the wood. Big ones, fresh. Mason squinted at the ground. Tracks, human. At least 3 different pairs of shoes had passed through here recently. One looked small, maybe a woman's. Another was wide and heavy. Work boots. He rounded the far side of the barn and stopped cold. There was a van, white, mud-streaked, no plates, parked behind a screen of brush and an old camper shell. The windows were tinted, too dark to see inside, but there was something in the front seat. A crumpled fast food bag. A receipt poking out of the cup holder. It was used. Easy, Duke, Mason whispered. The dog sniffed the bumper, then barked sharply once, loud, quick, alert. Mason looked toward the barn. The door was ajar. They moved in. The inside of the barn smelled of dust and mildew, but underneath that was something else. Something human. Sweat, rubber, bleach. It looked empty at first. Hay bales, tools, rusted wheelbarrows. But then Duke headed toward the far wall, tail low, ears flat. That's when Mason heard it. A creak, faint, behind the wall. He approached slowly and noticed the boards were newer, different nails, different wood grain. He tapped once. Hollow. Of course, he muttered. A hidden door. It took a minute to find the latch, but once he did, the panel swung open. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, built from plywood and cheap drywall. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. No one builds a hidden corridor in a barn unless they have something to hide. Mason and Duke stepped in. The hallway curved slightly, leading to a thick metal door with a keypad. Locked. But right beside it, a small air vent. Too small for Mason, but Duke was already sniffing at it, ears up. From behind the door came a sound. A voice. Soft. Fragile. Hello? Mason's heart pounded. This is Officer Mason Briggs, State Police. Can you hear me? A pause. Then, yes, please help us. It took another hour to get signal, call for backup, and wait. Mason stayed put, guarding the barn and van, praying no one returned before his team arrived. Duke never left the metal door, lying flat with his nose pressed to the vent. When the tactical team finally arrived and breached the building, what they found stopped everyone cold. 4 women, all pregnant, all under 30, none restrained but none free. Each had her own mattress on the floor, with crates of prenatal vitamins and bottles of water nearby. Their arms were marked with faint bruises from IVs. A whiteboard listed names, dates, and strange alphanumeric codes beside each: DEL 27, INTEL 43, NYC 12. 2 of the women, one named Lexi, the other named Brianna, burst into tears when they saw Duke. The youngest, Megan, looked like she hadn't spoken in days. The 4th woman, Olivia, stepped forward and asked one question. Are we going to be sold? Back at the station, Mason sat in front of a dry erase board filled with maps, timelines, and strings of yarn connecting names and cities. Lexi had answered a job posting in Boise, live-in assistant for an elderly woman. Brianna was from Spokane, offered a job as a nanny. Megan had applied for an organic farming job. And Olivia had simply been traveling, sleeping in her car, when a couple offered her work and a place to stay. All 4 had one thing in common. They were pregnant and alone. They'd each been brought to the compound by the same man, tall, brown hair, generic face, went by Jeff, drove a white van, gave them vitamins, clean clothes, a soft bed, told them their babies would be adopted by wealthy couples who'd raise them right, said it was the only way for girls like them. No chains, no bars, just manipulation, isolation, and control. Mason couldn't sleep that night. He kept seeing the codes on the whiteboard. DEL 27, INTL 43, NYC 12. Those weren't room numbers. They were destinations. And the women, they were part of something far larger than he imagined. A trafficking ring, not for labor, not for drugs, for babies. And they'd been lured in with kindness. The next morning, Mason reviewed the dash cam footage from the tactical van. Something caught his eye. As they were loading the women into ambulances, Duke had circled the barn again, nose to the ground, tail stiff. He stopped near a shed that no one had entered during the raid. Mason hadn't noticed it before, half covered in brush, padlocked. But Duke had, and that meant one thing. There was more. The shed looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Vines crawled up the wooden frame like fingers holding a secret. The padlock was old but intact, covered in rust, with scratches near the keyhole that didn't match the age of the wood. Mason wouldn't have noticed it at all if it weren't for Duke. The German Shepherd was locked in, nose pressed to the dirt, tail rigid. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just stared at the door like it might open itself if he waited long enough. Mason stepped closer, heart starting to race. He unhooked his flashlight and swept it across the structure. There were no windows, no exterior lights. It was too small to be a storage unit, too out of place to be random. Duke looked up at him once, then back at the door. "All right, buddy," Mason whispered. "Let's see what you've got." With a crowbar and a deep breath, Mason pried the padlock loose. The hinges shrieked as he pushed the door open. A wave of stale air rushed out, musty, metallic, and faintly sour. Duke didn't hesitate. He stepped in first, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. Mason followed, flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. Inside were shelves, stacks of old paperwork, binders, and boxes labeled with initials and numbers. A small generator hummed in the corner, keeping a mini fridge running. On top of it, a sealed medical waste bin. He opened the first binder. Photos, dozens of them. Ultrasound printouts, medical intake forms, notes scribbled in shorthand with names, weights, weeks of gestation. And behind each page, a file number that matched the codes found on the whiteboard inside the barn. DL 27, NYC 12, MIA 36. These weren't just documents, they were logs, transaction records. Mason turned toward a cabinet in the corner. The lock was broken. Inside, piles of old cell phones, wallets, and IDs. He recognized some of the names. Hannah Lewis, April Corbin, Marissa Dunn. And one more he didn't. Sophia Barrett. Mason flipped open the wallet. The ID said she was 27 from New Mexico. No missing persons report, no red flags, nothing in the database. But she was in the system, and that meant she might still be here. Or worse, she'd already been moved. Back at the station, Mason updated the board. He marked Sophia Barrett in red. He flagged the shed as a secondary evidence scene. The medical fridge contained blood samples, sealed IV bags, and pregnancy test kits. Forensics was on their way, but something told Mason they were still one step behind. Duke hadn't just found hidden papers. He had uncovered the nerve center of an operation. And it was built like a machine, clean, methodical, and visible. The next day, Olivia, the most outspoken of the rescued women, agreed to sit down with Mason. They met in a small conference room, soft light from the window stretching across the table. Olivia looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hands trembling slightly. But her voice held steel. They promised us adoption, she began. Said they worked with agencies overseas, families that couldn't have kids. I believed it, at first. Mason nodded. When did it change? When Sophia tried to leave. That name again, Sophia. She said something felt off. They stopped giving her food, said she was compromised. That night, she disappeared. Did they say where she went? Olivia hesitated. No, but there was blood on the floor. Mason took a deep breath. They had 3 women recovering, 1 in shock, and 1, Sophia, unaccounted for. He pulled Duke's leash and returned to the compound. This time, they didn't go to the barn. They went behind it. The brush was thick, overgrown, and wild. But Duke was relentless. He sniffed near an old compost bin, then turned sharply left, growling. They reached a spot near the edge of the clearing where the ground dipped unnaturally. Mason knelt. Fresh dirt. Disturbed earth. God, he muttered, please don't let it be. He called in a forensic team, but he already knew. The medical examiner confirmed it 2 days later. Female, age range 25-30. Estimated time of death, 7-10 days prior. DNA later matched Sophia Barrett. The cause of death, blunt force trauma. She had tried to escape, and they'd buried her in a shallow grave like a broken promise. The entire station fell silent when the results came back. Even the hardened officers who'd seen years of violence sat back stunned. These women weren't just victims of manipulation. They were disposable cargo, moved, sold, buried. Mason sat in his truck for an hour that night, Duke in the passenger seat, head resting on his lap. The cold from the Cascade wind didn't even register. He kept seeing Olivia's eyes, hearing Sophia's name. He thought of all the other names on the list, codes like ATL-29 and LAX-44. Were those babies already gone? Had they been shipped to wherever that ring operated from? And more importantly, who else was involved? They checked the van. Hidden beneath the floorboard, officers found a burner phone, used sparingly. But one number had been contacted multiple times. The call traced back to a nurse practitioner in Portland. Her name, Lisa Durand. She had no criminal record. Her license was valid. She worked part-time at a fertility clinic. Mason pulled her employee file. She specialized in prenatal assessments and had recently taken extended time off. When they checked her financials, they found large deposits in cash, always just under the reporting threshold. Regular, predictable. She was part of it, not the driver, not the kidnapper, but the middle woman, the one who verified pregnancies, tracked due dates, and ensured the product was healthy. And the worst part, she was still out there. That night, Mason pinned a new name to the wall, Lisa Durand, Portland. Then he added another red thread. From her name, he connected it to a new photo, a new missing person, a 22-year-old woman named Haley Ruiz, last seen entering a walk-in clinic in Portland 2 weeks ago. Guess who her appointment was with? Lisa Durand. The pattern was repeating. And if they didn't move fast, Haley would be the next DEL-28 or MIA-37. The hallway inside the Portland fertility clinic smelled like antiseptic and something artificial. Lavender-scented air fresheners trying too hard to be calming. Officer Mason Briggs hated places like this, not because of the patients, because of the masks people wore in them. Smiles, soft tones, and friendly desk staff hiding the quiet gears of something far darker. Duke's claws clicked across the tile as he walked beside Mason, his body tense, head low. His vest was labeled clearly, K9 unit, bold and unmistakable. Still, the receptionist offered a plastic smile as they approached. Can I help you? She asked, eyes flicking to the dog. We're here to speak with Lisa Durand, Mason said, flashing his badge. Is she in today? The receptionist hesitated. She's not seeing patients. She's out on personal leave. She was here last Tuesday. You have her schedule in front of you. Don't lie to me. The woman's smile faltered. Let me get the office manager. Mason nodded once. That's a good idea. 15 minutes later, Lisa Durand walked in through the back door. She wasn't expecting him. Mason saw it the second her eyes landed on Duke. Her stride slowed, her pupils dilated. She recovered quickly, but it was enough. Lisa Durand looked like someone's trustworthy aunt. Mid-50s, light cardigan, neat ponytail. her ID badge still clipped to her blouse. "I heard you were looking for me," she said. "That's right. Mind if we talk in private?" She gestured toward her office. Once inside, Mason let Duke sit by the door but didn't leash him. The dog knew when to stay alert. Mason closed the door and sat down across from her. "We're investigating a compound near Riverbend. 4 women were found held against their will. Pregnant women." Lisa didn't blink. "That's terrible. One of them is dead now, buried in the woods behind the barn. Her name was Sophia Barrett." Now she blinked. "You were her nurse. You saw her. You examined her. Don't lie." "I examined hundreds of women." "No, you tracked her. You tagged her. You kept notes on gestational age and health vitals. And we found your initials on multiple medical logs from the property." Lisa inhaled sharply but said nothing. "You're not just a nurse. You're a gatekeeper." "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. Duke growled. It was low but unmistakable. Lisa's eyes dropped to him, and Mason watched her composure crack. Just a hairline fracture. But enough. "You helped choose who was fit to carry a child," Mason said. "And when they weren't, you decided what happened next." Her lips tightened. "You don't understand what you've walked into." "Then help me understand." Lisa sat back in her chair, eyes cold now. "It's bigger than you think," she said. "Riverbend isn't the only site. It's just the one you stumbled on. You shut it down? Fine, they'll open another next month." "Who's they?" She didn't answer. "Where's Haley Ruiz?" That made her flinch. "We know she came in 2 weeks ago. You examined her, and now she's gone off the grid. I never saw her again after that. But someone did." Back at the precinct, Mason sat in the briefing room with his captain and 2 agents from DHS. The investigation had officially turned federal now. Evidence from the shed, the van, the whiteboard, all of it pointed to an organized trafficking ring spanning state lines. The feds had a name for it, Project Eden. It had popped up once before, 7 years ago, in a similar case involving undocumented women in Texas. The operation was shut down, but no one was ever convicted. The people behind it moved like shadows. Fast, clean, untraceable. Mason felt sick. They weren't selling the women. They were selling the babies. Born in secret, sold overseas or to desperate couples who didn't want to wait years on adoption lists. No paperwork, no background checks, just cold, quiet money. And they were still doing it. That night, Mason drove home but didn't get out of the car. He sat behind the wheel, staring at the empty street. Streetlights hummed above. Duke lay quietly in the back seat, watching his partner. Mason had seen evil before. He'd dealt with gang hits, domestic abuse, and overdoses. But this was systemic, industrialized, babies as inventory, women as packaging. He thought of Olivia, of Lexi, of Brianna, of Sophia, of Haley. He pulled out the burner phone found in the van. They'd cloned it, but the messages were encrypted, nothing usable. Still, one number kept showing up in the call log, a disposable prepaid traced to a hotel near the Portland docks. Mason didn't wait for backup. He turned the key and drove. The hotel was the kind of place people used to disappear. Cash only. No cameras, deadbolt locks with rusted chains. He parked across the street, lights off, engine idle. Duke was already alert, watching the front entrance. Then, movement. A man in a hoodie came out the side door carrying a black duffel. He climbed into a silver SUV. No plates. Tinted windows. Mason tailed him, careful not to get too close. The SUV drove 10 minutes, then pulled into an abandoned parking lot behind an old warehouse. The man got out, opened the back, and helped a young woman step down. She was thin, pale, wearing scrubs and no shoes. Mason's heart stopped. It was Haley Ruiz. He called it in, quietly. Tactical backup was en route, but he couldn't wait. He pulled up fast, cut the headlights, and opened the door. "Police, hands in the air!" The man bolted. Mason let Duke go. The canine sprinted like a missile, teeth bared, catching the suspect at the knees. The man screamed, crashed to the ground, arms flailing. Mason cuffed him in under 30 seconds. Haley stood frozen beside the van, shivering. Tears welled in her eyes. "You're safe now," Mason said, voice soft. "You're gonna be okay." She collapsed into his arms. At the station, Haley told him everything. She'd been taken to a suburban house, kept inside, isolated. The nurse checked her every few days. They told her she'd be giving a miracle to a family who needed it. But when she asked questions, they took her phone, then her name, then her clothes. Told her she was now INTL 38. She wasn't a person anymore. She was a shipment. Lisa Duran was arrested 2 days later. More names followed. The driver, the motel owner, even a woman posing as a counselor who prepped the girls psychologically. Each name connected to a wider web. But no one knew who was at the top. No one knew where the next riverbend would be. The interrogation room was quiet, sterile, and buzzing with tension. Lisa Duran hadn't said a word since they booked her. Not when Mason read her Miranda rights. Not when they showed her photos of the Riverbend compound. Not even when Haley Ruiz pointed to her in a photo lineup and said, "That's the one." She lied to all of us. She sat behind the table, hands folded neatly, wearing a calm so artificial it felt mechanical. Mason had seen monsters before, but never one who smiled like a grandmother and wore pastel cardigans. "You're not going to outweight this," he said. "We know what you did." Still nothing. Mason dropped a stack of documents onto the table. "We traced the wire transfers, all of it. You got paid cash, but someone upstream didn't. Offshore accounts, shell companies. One of them used your old license number to register a medical consulting firm in Nevada. Ring any bells?" Lisa blinked, once, slowly. "You helped turn newborns into assets. You monitored the girls. You scheduled deliveries. And when one of them tried to leave, you ordered a cleanup." She leaned forward just a little. "You think I'm the villain in this?" she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand the kind of people you're dealing with." "Then help me understand." She smiled again and said nothing. Mason walked out frustrated but not surprised. He found Duke waiting outside the door, tail thumping softly against the tile. Even the Molly seemed to sense that something wasn't adding up. The evidence from the warehouse raid was piling up. Burner phones, encrypted USB drives, prenatal vitamins, and even freshly signed adoption agreements, most with forged notary stamps. But something still didn't sit right. Someone was orchestrating all of this from a distance. Someone with reach, money, and a complete disregard for human life. And every trail they followed led to a dead end or a corpse. Back in his office, Mason sifted through the financial records again. He paused at a name he hadn't noticed before, North Point Logistics. It was listed as the sender on a $25,000 transfer to Lisa's consulting firm 3 months ago. On paper, North Point was a warehouse management company specializing in medical equipment. He dug deeper. The company had no website, no physical location listed. But the mailing address? A law firm in downtown Seattle. He picked up the phone. The lawyer who answered was polite. Too polite. He said North Point was simply one of many clients, and that we don't discuss client business without a subpoena. Mason got the subpoena. 2 days later, he received a faxed response. North Point Logistics is no longer an active entity, dissolved 3 weeks ago. Right around the time Riverbend was raided. Convenient. Mason slammed the file shut and leaned back in his chair. Someone was cleaning house. It was late, almost 11 p.m., when Mason finally pulled into his driveway. Duke stretched in the back seat, groaning softly, his job never really done. As Mason stepped onto the porch, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A woman's voice, calm but tight with urgency. "You need to stop looking." "Who is this?" "If you care about your dog, if you care about your badge, you'll leave it alone." "Listen to me." But the line went dead. Mason stood frozen. Duke walked up beside him, brushing his leg like he could feel the shift in his partner's heart rate. This was no longer just a job. It was a warning. The next morning, Mason went straight to internal affairs. He asked for surveillance footage of every visit to Lisa Duran over the last month while she was on medical leave. They pulled it up. A grainy hallway camera showed 3 different visitors. 2 men in suits, unidentified. 1 woman. Mason paused the video, zoomed in, and his stomach dropped. It was Sergeant Denise Keller, his supervisor. A woman he'd known for 8 years. Someone who'd helped train rookies. Someone he'd shared Thanksgiving shift meals with. She was walking into Lisa's home with a briefcase. Not once, not twice, 4 times. Mason didn't go to the captain. He went to Keller directly. Found her in the parking garage, halfway through loading her SUV with gym gear. She smiled when she saw him. "Briggs, what's up?" "You visited Lisa Duran last month." The smile faltered. "Excuse me? I've got security footage." She froze. "I'm going to ask you one time, Denise. Were you involved?" Silence. Then, "You don't know what this is." "I know enough." "You think busting one barn shuts it all down?" she snapped. "These girls were going nowhere. No families, no futures. We gave them purpose. You gave their babies a price tag. And what did you give them, Mason? A cot in a shelter? A dead-end bus ticket back to a place they were trying to escape?" His fists clenched. "I gave them freedom." Keller exhaled slowly, the weight of her choice is finally visible. "You're going to report me?" "No," Mason said. "I'm going to arrest you." She didn't resist. The fallout was ugly. Internal Affairs launched a full investigation. Half a dozen officers were pulled into questioning. A judge ordered all pending adoptions linked to North Point Logistics frozen. Lisa Duran finally cracked. She gave them partial names, first names only. Elijah, Miranda, Carter. And then a location. A new site in Montana. Not a barn this time. A medical spa. Fronted as a fertility retreat. Built to look clean, safe, luxurious. But behind the massage tables and mineral water? Birthing rooms. Mason's blood turned cold. The clock was ticking again. At home, Mason sat in the dark, Duke resting quietly at his feet. The betrayal hit hard. Not just Keller, but the whole system that let this thing breathe. It had funding, protection, infrastructure, and worse, demand. They weren't dealing with chaos. They were up against something organized, well-oiled, and global. The worst kind of evil, the kind that hides behind paperwork and polite language. But Mason had something they didn't. He had Duke, and he had truth, and he wasn't stopping. Not now. Not ever. The air in Montana was different. Crisper, colder. Like the wind didn't carry secrets, just warnings. Mason Briggs had been driving for nearly 9 hours. The sun dipped behind the mountain range, washing the hills in orange and steel blue. Duke rested in the back seat, eyes open, head low, ears twitching with every passing mile. The K9 never fully slept when they were on the move. He knew this wasn't just another trip. The GPS pinged as they pulled onto a narrow gravel road flanked by pine trees. Sagewell Rejuvenation and Wellness Center sat tucked into a valley just outside Livingston. On paper, it was a boutique spa for fertility retreats. In reality, it was the second Riverbend. Mason killed the headlights half a mile from the building. He reached back and tapped Duke gently on the shoulder. "You ready, partner?" The dog lifted his head. It was time. They hiked the last stretch on foot, staying in the shadows. The building was surprisingly modern, glass and stone, softly lit like a ski lodge. A gravel driveway looped around to a parking area with 4 cars. Not a soul in sight. But something wasn't right. No receptionist visible through the windows. No patients. No staff moving between rooms. It looked staged, like a showroom designed for one purpose, to impress whoever was paying. Mason crouched behind a hedge and raised his binoculars. That's when he saw her. A woman, mid-20s, pale, barefoot, stepping cautiously out the back door. She looked over her shoulder 3 times before moving toward the tree line. Her hands trembled. She was carrying nothing, just a hospital gown and fear in her eyes. Then the back floodlights snapped on, and 2 men bolted out after her. Mason stood. "Duke, go!" The shepherd exploded forward, tearing through brush like a missile. Mason was right behind him, gun drawn, badge swinging on his chest. The men stopped when they saw the dog. One turned to run, the other froze in place. Duke lunged, tackling the runner at the knees, sending him crashing to the ground. "State police!" Mason barked, leveling his weapon at the second man. "Hands where I can see them." The woman collapsed to her knees near a fallen log, sobbing. Mason cuffed both men, then rushed to her side. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, sobbing harder. "My name is Mason. I'm here to help. You're safe now, all right?" She looked up slowly. "My name's Sophia." Mason's blood turned to ice. "I'm sorry," he asked carefully. "Sophia Barrett," she whispered. "But that's not possible. You were listed." "I know," she said, eyes burning. "They wanted you to think I was dead." Back at a local sheriff's outpost, Mason sat across from Sophia in a quiet interview room. Duke lay nearby, head on his paws but watching her closely, like he knew she'd been through hell. "I need you to start from the beginning," Mason said softly. Sophia nodded. She looked hollow. Not broken, but hollow, like someone who'd seen too much to process at once. "They caught me trying to leave Riverbend. Lisa told them I was a liability, said I was talking to the others too much, making them question things. She told us you died." "I know," she whispered. "She told them to make it look that way. They drugged me. When I woke up, I was here." Mason gritted his teeth. "They buried someone else." Sophia nodded. "Another girl who tried to run. She was pregnant, too." "Did you know her name?" She swallowed. "Nina." Sophia's story unraveled a thread Mason hadn't seen coming. After Riverbend was compromised, the operation accelerated. Sagewell had already been prepped as a backup. The women were moved quietly, some in ambulances marked as private transport, others in vans with tinted windows. No one questioned a facility labeled fertility retreat. The clients were international, high-paying, Most came through private channels, no adoption agencies, no legal scrutiny. Sophia said she overheard a nurse mention one baby had fetched 160,000. What about the deliveries? Mason asked. They had a midwife, Sophia said, and a doctor. Real credentials. I think they were flown in under aliases. It wasn't just one birth, it was scheduled, like a hotel calendar, check in, check out. And the mothers? Some were let go after delivery, but only if they signed NDAs. Others, they just vanished. One of the men Mason arrested was a former EMT named Kyle Hurst. Under pressure, he confessed. He'd been paid $10,000 a month to manage transport and containment. His job was to make sure the women didn't run. And when they did, they told me to make it clean, scare them. If that didn't work, well, he wouldn't say who they were. But he gave Mason something else. A delivery manifest. On it, 4 names, each with initials, birth status, and assigned client code. One of the codes matched a private jet registration tied to a billionaire couple in the Cayman Islands. This wasn't black market adoption. This was bespoke trafficking, coordinated, funded, and protected. Mason sat in his hotel room that night, laptop open, files scattered across the bed. Duke lay nearby, eyes tracking his every move. The light from the screen reflected off a corkboard propped against the wall. He'd built a map. Riverbend, Sagewell, Lisa Duran, North Point Logistics, Keller, and now Sophia Barrett. He stared at the red lines. At the center of them all, a name circled in bold, Elijah. Sophia had heard it mentioned more than once, always in whispers, always with fear. Mason didn't have a last name. No photo. Just the way people said it. Like a shadow. Like a myth. But this man wasn't a myth. He was real. And Mason was going to find him. The next morning, Mason drove Sophia to a safe house operated by a nonprofit that specialized in protecting trafficking survivors. A team of counselors and medics welcomed her. She hugged Duke before getting out of the car. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Mason nodded. "You're stronger than you think." He watched her disappear inside. Then he turned the car around. The fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. They didn't knock. They broke the door down. Mason Briggs and a multi-agency task force stormed the estate at 6:43 a.m. sharp. Hidden deep in a private valley near Boise, Idaho, the 14,000-square-foot compound belonged to a shell company registered in Dubai. The property was remote, walled in, and guarded like a fortress. But nothing could prepare them for what they'd find inside. The house was too clean. Floor-to-ceiling windows, glass artwork, silence that felt artificial. The security teams surrendered without a fight. Men in tactical polos, earpieces, and fake IDs. But no sign of Elijah. Mason and Duke moved through the rooms. Master bedroom, study, wine cellar, nursery. Yes, a nursery. Duke stopped cold outside a thick steel door in the west wing. He growled low, his body braced like he could smell something nobody else could. Mason motioned to his team. They breached the door and found hell. 6 women, 4 of them visibly pregnant. 2 infants in cribs, wrapped in branded cotton blankets, under soft light and classical music. Everything was designed to look high-end, like a spa. But the medical equipment said otherwise. One woman had an IV line running into her arm. Another was hooked up to a fetal monitor. The room reeked of antiseptic, lavender oil, and fear. When they saw Mason, one of them whispered, "Please don't let them take my baby." Duke moved first, approaching the woman without hesitation, nuzzling her arm. She burst into tears. It took the rest of the morning to extract them safely, but still no Elijah. It wasn't until that afternoon that they found the room. Hidden beneath the detached garage, no windows, no heat. And in the center, a surgical table, strapped to a woman unconscious, dehydrated but alive. She had no ID, no name. But taped to the wall beside her was a chart, Intel 51, midterm viable, unassigned. She was next. The man known as Elijah Carter was arrested 2 days later in a luxury penthouse in Vancouver. Real name, Elias Ward. Dual citizenship, no criminal record. Former fertility specialist. Suspended license. Under half a dozen aliases, he traveled the world, hosted retreats, and funneled over $12 million through shell corporations linked to illegal surrogacy rings. He didn't resist arrest, didn't speak during booking, just smiled, and asked one question. "Do you know how many families I helped?" Back in Oregon, Mason stood by the river, Duke beside him, watching the current move like time, steady, indifferent. The case had exploded across the news. Canine officer uncovers baby trafficking ring. Journalists wanted interviews, politicians wanted statements. Activists flooded the precinct with support. But none of that mattered to Mason. Not really. What mattered was Sophia, now safe in a relocation program, starting over. What mattered was the two babies found in Boise, already placed with legitimate, loving foster families. What mattered was Duke, who without saying a word had done more than most humans ever could. A few days later, Mason was called into the DA's office. Elijah's attorneys were offering a deal. Names, accounts, infrastructure. In exchange, no life sentence. The room went quiet when the DA turned to Mason. "What do you think?" Mason didn't blink. No deal. Later that night, Mason sat on the floor of his living room, arms resting on his knees. Duke lay beside him, chewing the edge of a well-worn rope toy. "Think it's over?" Mason asked aloud, not expecting an answer. Duke looked up, then gently dropped the toy at Mason's feet. And for the first time in weeks, Mason smiled. 3 months passed. Lisa Duran was convicted. Sergeant Denise Keller pled guilty to conspiracy and obstruction. The international task force grew. More raids followed in Colorado, Arizona, and even overseas. The network was bleeding, but some scars would never heal. One spring morning, Mason received a letter. No return address. Inside was a photo. Sophia, standing in a sunny backyard, holding her newborn daughter. A note scribbled underneath, "You gave her a life. You gave me a future. Thank you." Mason sat down hard in his chair. He stared at the photo for a long time, then clipped it above his desk right next to Duke's training certificate. Some nights, the dreams still came. The barn, the grave, the names written on a whiteboard like products in inventory. But then he'd wake up to Duke snoring on the floor. And he remembered, they didn't just uncover a ring. They gave those women a voice. They gave the forest back its ghosts. They gave evil a name. And they didn't flinch. Thank you for following this powerful journey. Every view, every comment, every share matters more than you know. Now we want to hear from you. If you saw something suspicious, would you speak up or stay silent? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And never forget, heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear fur and walk on 4 legs.